November 20th, 1942, 01:45 hours. The ground didn't catch me, it slammed into me, a hard, unforgiving impact against the frozen crust of the Norwegian coast. There was no cushion, just the brutal reality of bedrock hidden under 2 inches of ice. My parachute canopy collapsed around me, hissing like a dying snake as it dragged across the snow. I didn't have a second to check for broken bones. I had to cut the lines. Immediately. My hands were already numb, fumbling for the switchblade in my pocket. The air temperature was 15 degrees below zero, but with the wind chill coming off the North Sea, it felt like it could shatter steel. Every breath I took tasted like iron. It was a cold so aggressive it felt like a physical assault, freezing the moisture inside my nose the instant I inhaled. I sliced the cords, the nylon parting with a sharp snap that sounded entirely too loud in the dead of night. I rolled onto my stomach, burying my face in the snow. 200 yards. That was the distance between my position and the German perimeter. The searchlights from the heavy water plant were already sweeping the dark. Huge mechanical eyes, hunting for anything that didn't belong. The beams cut through the blackness with a rhythmic, hypnotic menace. One pass every 30 seconds. If that light touched the white silk of my chute before I gathered it, the MG-42s in the towers would turn this hillside into a slaughterhouse. I pulled the bundle of white fabric under me, making myself small, indistinguishable from a snowdrift. The weight on my back was crushing. 40 kilograms, 88 pounds of high-grade TNT, fuses, and spare magazines for the Sten gun strapped directly to my spine. It felt less like a rucksack and more like I was carrying my own tombstone. The straps dug into my shoulders, cutting off circulation, but I couldn't shift the weight. Movement meant death. I watched the beam of light slice over my head, illuminating the ice crystals floating in the air, missing me by a margin of maybe 10 feet. My heart was hammering against my ribs, so hard I was convinced the vibration was traveling through the ground, alerting every Jerry sentry within a mile. We began the crawl. This wasn't walking. This was an agonizing inch-by-inch drag through a minefield. Intelligence said the area was mined, but the maps were weeks old. In this game, a weeks-old map is a suicide note. I moved like a reptile, keeping my profile lower than the rocks. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, but I could feel the tension radiating off the man in front of me. We were ghosting through their backyard. The snow here wasn't soft. It was jagged, refrozen ice that tore at the knees of my trousers and scraped raw skin. Every time my hand touched a hard lump under the snow, I froze, waiting for the click of a pressure plate. The silence was heavy, pressurized. It wasn't empty. It was full of potential violence. Then we hit the secondary perimeter. I was focused on the wire when I heard it. The crunch, distinct, heavy, the sound of hobnailed jackboots grinding into packed snow. Not a patrol vehicle, but a walker, a sentry. He was close. I stopped breathing. I pushed my face into the ice until it burned. The footsteps were getting louder, a rhythmic crunch, 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 coming from the right. Then came the second sound, the one that turns your blood to slush, the low, wet panting of an animal, a German shepherd. The wind was blowing from them to us, That was the only miracle we had that night. The dog hadn't scented us yet, but it knew something was wrong. I could hear the animal pause, the jingle of the metal tag on its collar, echoing like a church bell in that vacuum of silence. The guard stopped. He was 6 feet away. 6 feet. I could see the polish on his boots reflecting the ambient starlight. I could smell the acrid scent of cheap tobacco smoke clinging to his wool greatcoat. Slowly, with a movement that took a lifetime, I moved my right hand to my chest. I didn't reach for the Sten gun. The mechanical clatter of the bolt would be too loud. I drew the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. The black oxide coating on the blade swallowed the light. I gripped the handle until my knuckles turned white. My other hand moved to my own throat. I wasn't protecting my neck. I was suppressing a cough. The freezing air was tickling my lungs, a spasm building up in my chest that wanted to explode. I pressed the cold steel of the knife blade flat against my own neck, using the shock of the cold metal to shock my body into silence. The dog whined, a low, guttural sound. The guard muttered something in German, a sharp command to heel, and kicked the snow off his boots. The sound was deafening. He struck a match to light a cigarette. The flare of the flame was blinding in the dark, illuminating his face for a split second. Young, bored, completely unaware that 5 British commandos were lying in the snow 2 paces from his lethal zone. He took a drag, exhaled a cloud of gray smoke, and pulled on the leash. The leather creaked. They started walking again. Crunch, 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 fading away. I didn't exhale for another full minute. I lay there, the knife still against my neck, the taste of adrenaline sour in my mouth, listening to the sound of death walking away, knowing that the next time we met, there wouldn't be any walking away for either of us. The silence returned, but it had changed. It was no longer empty. It was waiting for the first shot. 2:30 a.m. We were inside the belly of the beast. The heavy water plant hummed with a low electric vibration that you could feel through the soles of your boots. It was a different kind of cold in here. Industrial, sterile, smelling of ozone and grease. I was kneeling by the primary turbine, my hands working independently of my brain. I was molding the plastic explosive, kneading the Nobel 808 like it was stiff dough. It was freezing, resisting the shape of the steel casing, but I forced it. Every second felt like an hour. We were ghosts. We weren't supposed to be there. We were just shadows rigging a bomb to the heart of the Third Reich's atomic ambition. Then it happened. The sound that ended the world. A simple, metallic clack. My number 2, a kid from Manchester, shifted his weight. His Sten gun swung on its sling, and the metal stock rapped against the hollow casing of the turbine. In a library, it would have been annoying. In the silence of a covert sabotage mission, it sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. A sentence of death. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just the echo dying in the rafters. Then, the universe screamed. The siren didn't wind up. It just erupted, a wavering mechanical howl that clawed at the inside of your skull. Floodlights snapped on, bleaching the darkness out of the yard outside, turning the night into a blinding, stark white stage. We were no longer hunters. We were the hunted. I didn't have to give the order. The plan was blown. Stealth was dead. Violence was the only currency left. Fire! I screamed, but I couldn't even hear my own voice. The glass windows high above us shattered inward, raining razor-sharp shards down on our helmets. The MG-42 in the watchtower had opened up. They call it Hitler's buzzsaw for a reason. It doesn't sound like a machine gun. It sounds like canvas ripping, a continuous, terrifying tear in the fabric of the air. 1,200 rounds a minute. The bullets hammered the steel catwalks around us, creating a storm of sparks and ricochets. It was a solid beam of lead that chewed through the metal drums we were using for cover like they were made of paper. I felt the heat of the tracers passing inches from my cheek, the air pressure changing with the sheer volume of fire. We had to move. If we stayed pinned, we died. I slapped a fresh magazine into my sten. Move! Breach the corridor, I signaled. We scrambled across the slick concrete floor, boots sliding on oil and glass. I kicked the side door open and we poured into the hallway. This was the fatal funnel. Narrow, concrete walls, no cover, and they were waiting. A squad of Wehrmacht soldiers spilled out from the guard room at the far end, maybe 15 yards away. Close quarters battle isn't like the movies. There is no choreography. It's a panic-induced blur of noise and muzzle flash. I didn't aim. I just pointed the square muzzle of the Sten down the corridor and squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in my hands, spitting 9mm brass casings that clattered against the wall. The hallway turned into a strobe light of gunfire. The sound was magnified by the confined space, a concussive force that slammed against our chests. The smell of cordite, that sharp pepper and sulfur stink of burnt gunpowder, filled the air instantly, choking us. I saw the lead German go down, his MP-40 spraying bullets into the ceiling as he fell, but they kept coming. I was firing in bursts, praying the cheap spring in my magazine wouldn't jam. Every shot illuminated the terrified faces of the men trying to kill me. We were close enough to see the color of their eyes, close enough to hear them screaming orders over the gunfire. Then I felt a wet slap against my face. Warm, sticky fluid sprayed across my right cheek and eye. I wiped it away, blinking, and looked to my left. It was the kid, the one who dropped the gun. He was on his knees, looking at me with an expression of pure confusion. There was a hole in his neck, a dark, pulsing ugliness where life was escaping. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle came out. He reached for me, his hand gripping my combat smock, leaving a bloody smear on the fabric. Time seemed to warp, stretching out. I wanted to grab him. I wanted to drag him to cover. But the mission, the damned mission. The turbines were still spinning. The charges weren't primed. If I stop to save him, the plant survives. If the plant survives, the war drags on. If the war drags on, millions die. It's the calculus of hell. I looked into his eyes as the light faded from them, and I made the choice that wakes me up in the middle of the night 40 years later. I stripped the satchel charge off his dying body, pushed his hand off my arm, and left him. I turned back to the fight, channeling every ounce of grief and rage into the trigger. "Cover me!" I roared, diving forward. I scrambled over the bodies, slipping in the blood that was slicking the floor, moving toward the main generator room. The air was thick with smoke now, a gray haze that stung the eyes. Bullets chipped the concrete around my head, sending dust into my eyes, but I was numb to it. I was a machine. I reached the main turbine, the heart of the facility. It was massive, a sprawling beast of iron and grease. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive dump of adrenaline coursing through my veins. My fine motor skills were gone. I was fumbling with the time pencil, the acid fuse. I had to crush the copper tube to break the vial of acid inside, which would eat through the wire and release the firing pin. 30 seconds. That's all the delay we had. I grabbed the fuse with my teeth and bit down hard on the copper end until I felt the glass vial crunch. A sour, metallic taste filled my mouth. I jammed the fuse into the block of TNT plastered against the turbine housing. "Timer running," I bellowed. 30 seconds. Get out! Get out! The remaining 3 of us turned and ran. We weren't fighting anymore. We were fleeing an eruption. The Germans were regrouping at the far end of the hall, setting up a heavy machine gun. We didn't engage. We threw our last smoke grenades and sprinted for the blast doors. My lungs were burning, screaming for oxygen. My legs felt like lead, weighted down by the snow-soaked wool and the exhaustion. But I could hear the ticking in my head, a silent countdown. 20 seconds. We hit the exterior door, shouldering it open, spilling out into the freezing night air. 10 seconds. The cold hit us like a physical blow again, freezing the sweat and blood on our uniforms instantly. 5 seconds. We scrambled over the railing, throwing ourselves into the snow, clawing at the frozen earth, trying to put anything solid between us and the building. 0. The world behind us turned inside out. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure wave that lifted me off the ground. The shock wave punched the air out of my lungs. I felt the heat on the back of my neck, a sudden searing gust that smelled of pulverized concrete and high explosives. The ground shuddered violently, bouncing my chest off the ice. Debris began to rain down around us, chunks of masonry, twisted steel, and shattered glass falling like a deadly hailstorm. I covered my head with my arms, curling into a ball as a piece of the roof slammed into the snow a foot from my head. The sky, which had been pitch black moments ago, was now glowing with an angry orange light. We had opened the gates of hell, and now we had to run before the devils caught us. 02:45. The shockwave didn't just push us, it launched us. For a second, I was airborne, a ragdoll tossed by the fiery breath of the explosion. I hit the snow hard, rolling, tumbling, debris raining down on my back like a shower of meteors. Chunks of concrete, twisted rebar, and shattered glass pelted the ground around us. I covered my head, curling into a ball as a piece of steel plating the size of a car door slammed into the earth 10 feet to my left with a thud that I felt in my teeth. But we couldn't stay down. Staying down meant dying. The blast had bought us confusion, but that currency was expiring fast. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the world. I grabbed the shoulder of the man next to me, hauling him up. We didn't speak. We just ran. Then came the headlights. Not the sweeping, calculated searchlights from the towers this time, but the frantic, bouncing beams of Opel Blitz trucks tearing down the perimeter road. They were cutting off our exit route. We veered left, plunging into the tree line. The forest was our only cover, but it was also a trap. The snow in the open had been hard packed, and here, under the canopy of the pines, it was deep, soft powder. If you've never tried to sprint through waist-deep drift snow while men are trying to kill you, you don't know the definition of futility. It's like running in a nightmare. Your legs pump, your heart explodes, but you move in slow motion. My boots were lead weights. Every step was a battle against physics. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and desperate, sounding like a broken bellows. My lungs were on fire. The cold air I was sucking in wasn't cooling me down. It was scorching my throat, tasting of copper and bile. Behind us, the darkness lit up with muzzle flashes. They were firing blind into the woods, spraying the tree line. Bullets cracked through the branches, stripping bark and pine needles that fluttered down like confetti. I heard the distinct thwack of a round burying itself in a trunk right next to my ear. Wood splinters sprayed my cheek. I didn't flinch. I didn't have the energy to flinch. I just kept driving my legs forward, lifting my knees high, tearing through the drifts. "Keep moving! Zigzag!" I yelled, though I doubt anyone heard me over the roar of blood in their own ears. We moved in a jagged line, throwing ourselves behind tree trunks, turning to fire 2-round bursts back at the pursuing shadows, then turning and running again. It was a fighting retreat, ugly and desperate. Then I heard them. The dogs. And this time, they weren't on leashes. The barking was frenzied, getting louder, closing the distance faster than any human could run. That primal fear kicked in, the lizard brain taking over. It wasn't about the mission anymore. It wasn't about king and country. It was about not getting torn apart by wolves in the dark. My body found a reserve of energy I didn't know I had, a hysterical strength born of pure terror. We crested a ridge and saw it. The drop. It wasn't a path. It was a steep, jagged scar in the earth, a ravine leading down to the river valley. It was a 40-degree slope of loose scree, ice, and boulders. Behind us, the shouts of the German infantry were getting distinct. I could hear their boots on the rocks. "Slide!" I screamed. I threw myself over the edge. I didn't climb. I surrendered to gravity. I slid on my back, boots first, using my heels as rudders. The world became a blur of spinning trees and rushing dark. Rocks tore at my uniform, scraping the skin off my elbows and thighs. I bounced off a boulder, the impact knocking the wind out of me, spinning me around so I was sliding face first. I clawed at the snow, trying to brake, but momentum had the wheel. I was a passenger on a ride to hell. I hit the bottom with a bone-jarring crunch, rolling into a snowbank at the edge of the frozen river. For a second, I just lay there, staring up at the canopy, waiting for a bullet to finish me. But nothing came, just the sound of sliding snow and the heavy thuds of my team landing around me. We scrambled up, stumbling onto the ice of the river. We were out of the kill box. We moved fast across the open ice, expecting the chatter of a machine gun to open up from the ridge, but the angle was too steep for them. They couldn't see us down here. We didn't stop until we reached the tree line on the far bank. Only then, collapsed against the rough bark of a pine tree, did I dare to look back. It was a sight that burned itself into my retina forever. The plant was a torch. The flames were roaring hundreds of feet into the air, a magnificent, terrifying column of orange and black smoke that blotted out the stars. It lit up the entire valley. Through the scope of my exhaustion, I could see tiny silhouettes on the ridge. The Germans. They were running back and forth, ant-like, helpless against the destruction we had unleashed. I checked my sten. Empty. I dropped the magazine into the snow and fumbled for my last fresh one. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely align the feed lips. It wasn't the cold, it was the crash. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the last hour was draining away, leaving behind a body that was broken, bruised, and freezing to death. I looked at the man next to me. His face was a mask of soot and blood, eyes wide, staring at the fire. We didn't high-five. We didn't cheer. There is no glory in moments like that, only relief so profound it feels like pain. We were alive. We had walked into the wolf's den, kicked the beast in the teeth, and walked out. I slotted the magazine home. The click was the only sound in the quiet forest. I looked at the fire one last time, feeling the heat of it even from a mile away, and then I turned my back on it. The war wasn't over, but tonight, we own the night. Let's move, I whispered. We've got a long walk home.